Imagine waking up in complete darkness. The air is heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth. You try to breathe, but it feels like the world is closing in around you. You try to move, but your limbs are stiff, trapped in something dense and unyielding. Panic sets in. You claw at the space above you, fingers scraping against the rough, packed dirt. You don't understand what's happening, until you do. You were supposed to be dead. Your heart is hammering now, the sound of it filling your ears. Every gasp of air feels stolen, every second a battle. You push harder, dirt falling into your mouth, filling your lungs with dust. You cough, choke, but you don't stop. You can't. The weight above you is too much, but you refuse to give in. Your fingers break through the surface, and for the first time, air rushes in, cool against your burning skin. Your arms tremble as you pull yourself upward, inch by inch, until your face meets the open night sky. Emily Summers should not be alive. And yet, here she is. Someone had tried to bury her. Someone had tried to erase her. But now, as she gasps for breath, as she crawls out of her own grave with shaking hands and a body battered by death itself, one thought burns hotter than any pain she feels. She remembers. And the man who did this to her? He thinks she's gone. He thinks he's safe. But Emily Summers is about to prove that the dead don't always stay buried. Emily Summers believed in love. The kind that lasts, the kind that feels safe, the kind that makes forever seem like a promise carved in stone. She was the woman who sent sweet messages in the middle of the day, the woman who set an extra plate at dinner because Victor always forgot to eat when he was busy with work. She saw the best in people, especially in the man she had vowed to spend her life with. Victor Summers was everything she had ever wanted. Charming, ambitious, successful. A man who knew how to make an entrance, how to command a room, how to make her feel like the only woman in the world when his eyes met hers. He built their life like he built his empire, flawlessly, meticulously, without a single detail out of place. Their home was a masterpiece, their vacations straight out of a dream. They had the kind of life that made other people envious. At least, that's what everyone thought. Because behind the grand gestures and expensive gifts, behind the carefully curated perfection, something was wrong. There were moments that didn't add up, explanations that felt too polished, stories that changed ever so slightly when repeated. The Victor she had married was starting to feel like someone she didn't quite recognize. And that feeling, it wouldn't go away. Emily wasn't the type to go looking for problems. She had always trusted her husband. But trust has a way of turning into doubt when the pieces don't fit, when the whispers in the back of your mind refuse to be ignored. And one day, without meaning to, without even knowing what she was about to find, she looked. That was the moment everything changed. It started with a bank statement. A single sheet of paper tucked between the usual stack of mail. Emily wasn't in the habit of checking Victor's finances. He handled that side of their life, always had. But that day, something made her look. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the first crack in a foundation she didn't realize was already crumbling. The numbers didn't make sense. The balances were lower than they should have been, payments made to accounts she didn't recognize. At first, she told herself there had to be an explanation. A business investment, a transfer he forgot to mention. But then she looked deeper. More statements. More missing money. Loans taken out in his name. In both their names. Their savings. Drained. The home they built together. Leveraged against debts she never knew existed. And then, there was the credit card charge. A hotel in another city. A room booked under a name she had never seen before. But the card? It was Victor's. Emily sat with the truth in her hands, feeling something inside her shift. The late nights. The business trips. The distance that had settled between them like an unspoken rule. She had ignored it, pushed it aside, convinced herself it was just stress, just work, just life. But now, there was no denying it. Victor wasn't just lying to her. He was lying about everything. That night, she waited. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just sat at the dining table, the papers spread out in front of her, and when Victor walked through the door, she looked him in the eyes and asked the question she already knew the answer to. Who is she? For the first time, Victor Summers didn't have an answer. He tried, of course. He fumbled, he denied. He threw out excuses that didn't quite land. But Emily had spent years knowing this man, memorizing the way he spoke, the way he moved, the way he lied when he thought he could get away with it. And this was the moment she saw him for what he really was. She laid out everything. The money, the debt, the loans, the other woman. She told him she was done, that she was leaving, that she was taking what was hers. And Victor, he didn't beg. He didn't apologize. He just stared at her, eyes cold, voice steady. You leave me, he said, and you leave with nothing. Emily held her ground. She had given him years of her life, built a future with him, trusted him. He had taken all of it for granted. And now, he thought he could scare her into staying. But Victor wouldn't let it come to that. He had another plan in mind. Hawaii was supposed to be a fresh start. That's what Victor told her. A getaway. A chance to step away from the chaos, from the lawyers, from the threats of divorce. A final attempt to fix what was broken. Emily agreed, not because she believed him, but because she needed time. Time to think. Time to figure out her next move. Time to prepare for what came next. But Victor, he had already decided. The house was beautiful, isolated. The kind of place where no one would hear an argument, where the ocean swallowed every sound, where the waves crashed against the shore like a heartbeat, steady, unrelenting. The first few days were quiet. Too quiet. Victor played the role of a husband trying to make things right, but Emily saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't remorseful. He was waiting. And then, the waiting ended. The argument started like all the others. Low voices, controlled anger. Then came the accusations, the threats. Emily was done pretending. She told him she was leaving. She told him there was no fixing this. She told him she wasn't afraid of him. Victor didn't like that. The gun was in his hand before she even registered what was happening. A single second stretched into eternity. Emily took a breath, and before she could exhale, the first shot rang out. A flash of white-hot pain tore through her chest. Her body jerked backward, legs giving way beneath her. The floor rushed up to meet her. Then, the second shot. Her vision blurred. The world dimmed. The ceiling above her wavered like a mirage. She could hear the sound of her own heartbeat slowing, feel the warmth of her blood pooling beneath her. And then, silence. Victor stood over her, watching. His face was unreadable. No panic. No hesitation. Just certainty. This was the end. At least, that's what he thought. Emily was still there. Somewhere. She could feel herself slipping, but she wasn't gone. Not yet. The darkness was closing in, but a small part of her clung to the last thread of consciousness. She heard him leave the room. Heard the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Felt the shift of her body as she was lifted, carried, moved. Then, the cold embrace of the earth. Dirt. Heavy. Suffocating. Pressing against her skin, filling her mouth, her nose. Victor Summers believed the problem was solved. But for Emily, the nightmare was only just beginning. Darkness. It wrapped around her like a second skin. Heavy. Crushing. Silent. Emily Summers was supposed to be dead. Her body was still, trapped beneath layers of damp earth, her lungs burning for air that didn't exist. The weight pressed down on her chest, suffocating her, squeezing the life out of what little remained. But then, something shifted. A flicker of awareness. A spark in the void. the faintest whisper of instinct clawing its way back from the edge. Her fingers twitched, then curled, then scraped. Pain shot through her body like a warning. Something was broken, maybe everything, but pain meant she was still here. Still alive. The realization hit her all at once. She was buried. Beneath the dirt. Beneath the world. Beneath the place where the living still walked. Panic should have taken over. She should have screamed. She should have let fear consume her. But there was no time for fear. Only movement. Only survival. Her hands moved before her mind could catch up. Nails tearing into the soil, digging, scratching, fighting against the suffocating grip of the grave. Every inch felt impossible. Every breath stolen from the earth that wanted to keep her. She clawed her way upward, muscles screaming, blood mixing with the dirt. Her vision blurred. Her head swam. Her body begged her to stop, to rest, to let go. But she didn't stop, because stopping meant dying. And Emily Summers wasn't ready to die. The first gasp of air was agony. The night air hit her like ice, flooding her lungs, choking her, making her cough up the grave that had almost claimed her. She was shaking, shivering, her body too weak to hold itself up. She didn't know how long she lay there, half dead in the open field, the taste of dirt and blood thick on her tongue. The world felt distant, hazy, unreal. Then, footsteps. A voice. A stranger. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Tried to move, but her body refused to listen. And then, nothing. The hospital room was too bright, too clean, too different from the cold, wet earth she had clawed herself from. Machines beeped. Oxygen filled her lungs. Voices murmured around her, soft and unfamiliar. She was alive. But she wasn't Emily Summers. She didn't know her name. Didn't know where she was. Didn't know the face that stared back at her from the mirror. The doctors called it amnesia. A miracle. A tragedy. A second chance. The world had buried Emily Summers. But in her place, a woman named Grace opened her eyes. Victor Summers had never been a man who believed in consequences. He believed in control, in power, in the ability to shape the world to his will. So when Emily disappeared, when the dirt settled, when the last breath of her name faded from existence, he did what he had always done. He moved forward. The grieving husband, the shattered widower, the man left alone in a world too cruel to understand his pain. He played the part well. Tears at the funeral, though there was no body to bury. Statements to the police, trembling hands and choked words, every sentence carefully crafted. A story rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. He had done everything he could, he told them. The search parties, the sleepless nights. But some losses were just too great. People believed him. They always had. And then, the reward for his performance, $1.5 million in life insurance. A payout for a love lost too soon. A tragedy no one dared question. With that money, Victor Summers became exactly who he always wanted to be. The past, gone. The memories, erased. The wife he had once sworn to love, nothing more than a name on a death certificate. And in her place, Rebecca, young, beautiful, blindly devoted, the perfect accessory to his new life. They traveled the world. Private jets, oceanfront resorts, restaurants where the price of a single meal could feed a family for months. Victor Summers had never been happier, never been freer. And Emily was dead. At least, that was what he told himself. Because in another city, another world, a woman named Grace was waking up every morning with no recollection of the man who had buried her alive. She had learned to smile again, to laugh, to love a life that was hers, even if she didn't remember the one she had lost. She had built something real, something strong, something unshackled from a past that had been stolen from her. For 10 years, Victor Summers believed he had won. For 10 years, he lived without guilt, without fear, without the weight of the grave he had dug with his own hands. For 10 years, he was certain the past would never come knocking. But fate had other plans. For 10 years, Emily Summers had been nothing more than a ghost trapped in a life she didn't recognize. She had no past, no family, no memories beyond the day she woke up in a hospital bed with a name she didn't remember and a face that felt unfamiliar. Doctors told her she had survived something terrible, though no one could say exactly what. Trauma, they called it. A mind's way of protecting itself. She had learned to live with the emptiness. Until one evening, in the middle of a hotel lobby, everything changed. It wasn't a lightning strike. It wasn't a slow realization creeping up on her like a shadow in the dark. It was a voice. A single word. Her name. Not the name she had carried for the last decade. The one before. The one she had forgotten. Emily. The world stopped. There, just feet away from her, was Victor. Older. A little grayer at the temples. But still him. Still the man who had smiled at her across candlelit dinners. Still the man whose hand she had once held so tightly. Still the man who had tried to kill her. The memories hit like a flood. Cold earth pressing against her lips. The sharp sting of betrayal. The sound of her own heartbeat as she clawed her way out of the grave he had left her in. And yet, he walked past her without a flicker of recognition. Because to Victor Summers, Emily Summers was dead. She should have run. That's what any sane person would have done. But sanity had left her the moment she heard his voice. Instead, she followed. To the car waiting outside. To the private jet whisking him away. To the city where his life continued without consequence. Atlanta. He had moved on. Built a new world. A new family. A life untouched by guilt. He had done what he always did. Left the past behind. But Emily was no longer the past. She was here. She was alive. And for the first time in 10 years, she knew exactly who she was. Now, she had one question left. How do you make a man like Victor Summers pay, without him ever realizing his dead wife is standing right behind him? The night had been ordinary for Victor Summers. A quiet evening. A glass of whiskey in hand. The kind of life he had built for himself after everything. He had won. He had gotten away with it. And then, a knock. At first, he ignored it. Probably nothing. But then it came again, sharp and deliberate. When he opened the door, the world tilted beneath him. She stood there. Not a memory. Not a ghost. Not a trick of the light. Emily. Alive. Breathing. Looking straight at him with eyes he had last seen filled with terror before he left her under the dirt. His voice failed him. His body locked in place. He couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Couldn't even deny what he was seeing. Because Emily wasn't here to ask why. She wasn't here to cry or beg or scream. She was here for justice. Her phone was in her hand, the screen glowing. Recording. You buried me. 3 words. That was all. 3 words that shattered the illusion he had lived in for a decade. And then, the sirens. They were already outside. Waiting. He had been a fool to think this day would never come. A fool to believe she would stay in the ground where he left her. The doorframe felt like it was closing in. The house, the wealth, the new life. None of it mattered now. It was over. The police moved in. A voice read him his rights. His wrists were forced behind his back. The cuffs locked. Fraud. Insurance scams. Attempted murder. A case built on his own arrogance. And as they dragged him toward the flashing lights, he looked back one last time. Emily was still standing there. Unshaken. Whole. Alive. The nightmare he thought he buried had come back to bury him instead. Victor Summers, once a man of wealth and charm, sat motionless at the defendant's table. Gone were the tailored suits, the confidence, the smug arrogance. In their place, prison-issued fabric and the hollow stare of a man who knew there was no escape. The evidence had spoken for itself. The fraudulent life insurance payout, the hidden debts, the staged disappearance of a woman he had vowed to love. But it was Emily's testimony that sealed his fate. She had stood before the jury, unshaken, recounting the night she should have died and the years it had taken to find her way back. And now, there was nothing left but the verdict. Life in prison. No parole. No second chances. The gavel struck. It was finished. Rebecca sat in the gallery, frozen, her hands gripping the edges of her seat. She had believed in him, built a life with him. And now all of it, the marriage, the home, the dreams, had been reduced to a lie. The man she had shared her bed with wasn't a devoted husband. He was a murderer. Emily, however, did not stay to watch as Victor was led away. His fate no longer mattered. The chains he had once placed around her had been broken the moment she stepped into that courtroom and spoke her truth. She had been lost for so long, buried beneath someone else's choices. But today, she walked away free. Not as a victim, as a survivor. Victor had spent 10 years believing he had committed the perfect crime, that he had erased her, that he had won. But in the end, he had buried himself. Some crimes feel airtight, planned down to the last detail, every risk accounted for, every loose end tied. The kind that should never unravel. The kind that should stay buried. But no crime is ever truly perfect. The past has a way of clawing itself back to the surface, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. And in this case, quite literally. Victor Summers believed he had won. He had the money, the new wife, the life he thought he deserved. But what he didn't know, what he never could have imagined, was that Emily wasn't just a memory. She wasn't just a name on an old insurance policy. She was still out there, breathing, waiting. And when the truth finally found its way back to him, it wasn't with whispers or quiet regrets. It was with the force of everything he had tried to destroy. The question now is, what would you have done? If you were Emily, standing in front of the man who had left you for dead, would you have chosen forgiveness or justice? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you want more stories that will make you question everything you think you know about human nature, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here at Vic's True Crime Stories, you never know what terrifying truth we'll uncover next.